Welcome everybody. Getting everybody admitted here, so give just a moment. Make sure you've got your wine, you got your glass. I know you don't have the 2018 correlation because we haven't shipped it yet, but whatever glass you have in your bottle, or whatever bottle you have in your cellar, whatever wine that's in your glass, that's the appropriate wine to drink tonight. Pete and I are here to have a conversation. Talk to you a little bit about farming. We came up with some fun ideas in the off-season in between the holidays to sort of expand upon the virtual events that we did last year. So one of the things we came up with was create a series about exploring the different correlations. It's really what this brand's about. It started about the correlation of relationships and the many ways in which a great bottle of wine is made, from the vineyard all the way through the process in winemaking, all the way through the relationships that we've created with you all in the past. Certainly, beyond the last year, but definitely we've had a lot of fun doing it with you virtually this last year. So I wanted to look at sort of some of our favorite correlations, and in thinking of this first one, it made a lot of sense to me, of course, to go to where the wine starts. And I reached out to my good friend and our vineyard manager, Pete Richmond, owner of Silverado Farming Company. Pete is I'm not sure where on your screen. He's just to my left on my screen, but it says Pete's phone, and he's there waving. And Pete and I have been working together. My goodness, Pete, this goes on back to 2006. So do the math. We'll do the math. So I'm, of course, up here at the winery. Pete's down in his office down in Napa. And I hope we'll have a fun afternoon together. As we, of course, as more guests come in, you guys know the drill. We'll let folks in. If you guys have any questions, feel free to share them below as we get a little bit further. Obviously, we'll have fun. It looks like a nice little intimate group today. We can unmute and have a conversation that way. And of course, also share. I'd love to know what you guys are drinking tonight too. So, wine and farming. It doesn't get more important than that. I'm sure you've all heard the cliche that wine is made in the vineyard, and maybe you hear a winemaker or you hear you hear a vineyard manager say this, and it sounds like this sort of fluffy statement that, it's all about this romance that happens out in the vineyard. But especially in the way that Pete and I look at things in the vineyard, and Martha, we believe in that so wholeheartedly. And the reason being is we're looking to get that fruit into the winery in the best absolute quality. We don't want to be interventionists. We don't want to get fruit in that sort of like, well, we didn't quite get the quality we want, so let's use all this magic and change that. If you look at my background in culinary, it's the same way. I look at with Thomas Keller when he was a guest last year, and he talked about the importance of knowing where your product's coming from, and that he was the first to champion the fact that the food that was ultimately going to be prepared and shared with his guests in the restaurant was only as good as the products that came from the relationships. And I think Pete and I would both agree that our wines are only as good as the grapes that come to the winery. So Pete, why don't we kick it off with just a little bit of your background, sort of, how long have you been in Napa Valley, what got you into farming?
So if we go back to the beginning, my family actually arrived in Napa in 1849 for the gold rush. My third great grandfather left his wife and unborn son to come to California, went to the gold fields and promptly died within sort of moments of getting there, but his uncle settled in Napa. I was not raised here. My mother left Napa in 1942. Best story I can tell you about her is some of you may remember somebody named Brother Timothy, who was the winemaker at Christian Brothers back in the old Christian Brothers days. And in the late 1930s, Brother Timothy would pick my mother and her friends up at their house, which they were 16, 17, and they would go work on the bottling line at Christian Brothers, and then he would drive them all home. So times have changed, certainly since then. So my wife and I came to Napa in gosh, 1990. Worked for down on the Central Coast before that for a vineyard called Bien Nacido, which some of you may know. A big producer of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Came to Napa, worked for a variety of different wineries. Before I went out on my own, I was at Kendall Jackson for about 6 years. So that's where I really got introduced to the idea of high-end farming to make high-end wines. So what we did in the vineyard really began to have an influence on me as it related to the wines and what we were trying to do, and was involved with some brands there called La Coya and Cardinal, and was able to really start working on some hillside vineyards. And so that's really where I sort of was able to hone the skills of growing grapes for a high-end product, similar to what Wes is working on with Correlation. 2001, decided to venture out on my own and started a vineyard management company. At the time, I had a really good job. I had a wife that didn't work, and I had a 6-year-old at home. And so it seemed like the obvious choice was to quit my really good job and go to work for myself. And I had a very supportive wife who said, okay, you can do it. So 20 years later, we're still here. We're able to work with folks like Wes and primarily focus on estate wineries versus growers. We like that relationship. We like the fact that we're able to sit down and taste the wines after harvest and throughout the years and see what we can do in the vineyard to influence the wines. And then really focusing on our farming practices, whether those be sustainable, organic, biodynamic, and our farm workers, which are something that we're very passionate about. We have an internal saying that we're much more concerned about our view in the Hispanic world than we are what the view of the wine writers have on us. So we really want to promote the farm worker and the work they do as being professional work. We've been able to establish a small foundation that donates 1% of our gross profits to funding farm worker issues and at-risk kids in the community. So those are the fun things that we get to do. And being able to work with vineyards like Correlation and seeing where the fruit comes from and trying to have long, lengthy conversations with the winemaking side to make the very best wines we can in the vineyard that translate to what we're after in the winery. So that's it in a very fast and brief nutshell.
Pete, I had no idea about your family history going that far back. That's incredible.
Wes, I'd like to say after 170 years, we own 1,500 square feet on Newark Drive, and that's our family accomplishment. So we're not the best of business people.
Well, I would attest, at least I could say from my experience, the vineyard management side of it has been a spectacular success.
Thank you.
But my goodness, I tell you, I imagine, I'm not sure if you've ever played around with Ancestry.com or anything like that, but I imagine that would be a fun task, experiment in your family.
Yeah, if you look up Nathan Coombs, who was one of the prominent people in Napa Valley and has numerous areas named after him, my third great grandfather was his far less successful and known business partner.
Oh, interesting.
So, there you go. That's we made a few errors along the way. And
so what you're saying, instead of it being called Coombsville District, it should have been called Richmond District?
Well, maybe, possibly, but we won't get into
that. We'll never say never. Yeah. As I was saying, gang, Pete and I started working together back in 2006, and Pete and his team manage all vineyard operations on our family estate at Vineyard 7 and 8. And in 2007, when we started having the opportunity to work with the Atchley Vineyard, which of course is the predominant vineyard source for Correlation Wine Company wines, we worked in the beginning, it was sort of a supplement to help Marv Atchley, the owner. Pete and his crew went in and helped when Marv wasn't able to get some of the stuff that we needed done, or just was looking to have some help in the vineyard. And after a couple of years of going that route, we approached Marv and said, hey, listen, Pete and his crew are already up here. And what do you say if we just take over management of your vineyard? And so the great thing is, one, proximity. The Atchley Vineyard is literally on the other side of our fence. There's a gate that separates the two properties. So it's not only a natural extension of our estate from a terroir standpoint, although it's fascinating where I'm sitting at the winery and to where the sort of the base of the actual vineyard, I mean, it's got to be probably 200 to 300 feet in elevation change. And I think that's one of the neat things about this district, Spring Mountain, is how close in proximity you can be to another vineyard, but how different, and even just on this estate here at Vineyard 7 and 8, how different the fruit can be. And that's one of the things in the very beginning when Pete and I got together was the understanding and the importance of really micromanaging the vineyard. And as he attested to his farm workers and his team, I mean, they're extensions of his family and they're extensions of our family. Right now, as things are going out in the vineyard right now, we're wrapping up pruning. And if any of you follow either of the correlation or the Vineyard 7-8 Instagram pages, have been trying to post some pictures of the mustard lately, because you got to look, I guess, at positives in a year where we haven't quite gotten the rain or anywhere close to the amount of rain that we're supposed to be getting this time of year. But maybe the positive is I don't think I've ever seen a mustard bloom in Napa Valley this vibrant. People often ask, is mustard there for just beauty? And I'm going to put Pete on the spot here in a second, but we did it for multiple reasons. Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. I look out the window right now and all I can see are fields and rows of yellow mustard flowers. So absolutely, from an aesthetic standpoint, it's spectacularly beautiful. We did it we did it for an important decision in our cover crop. And cover crop is something that's really important for us giving health back to the vines. And Pete, could you talk about cover crops and the importance?
Yeah. So probably something most people don't know is we actually, as growers, we don't plant the mustard. The mustard is naturally growing in the valley and comes up every spring. Wes is right. There's some years where it's more stunning than others. The month of February, if any of you get a chance to come to Napa the month of February, I think it is probably the prettiest month we have because everything is green and the mustard is blooming and it's gorgeous. But we also, after harvest, we're really interested in one, keeping our soils where they are so that when we do get rains, that we don't have erosion, and two, building up the nutritional content of our soil. So we use a variety of cover crops in a variety of situations. So in the correlation vineyard, we actually are putting cover crops down that we incorporate in the spring to increase the fertility of the soil and the ability of the vines to grow deeper and pull water up from down deeper. But we also have places where we're putting in cover crops that we plant that are pulling moisture out of the soil because maybe those vines are too vigorous and we want to try to slow the growth of them down. So we use the cover crops in a variety of ways to manage the growth of the vines during the season. And we typically seed about 8 different kinds of cover crops in our company, depending on what's happening at that particular site and what we're trying to do. And it may even get down to the point, and we do this at 7-8, where you would drive partway down the row and you would change the cover crop partway down the row because the vineyard starts to get more vigorous there than it was in the other portion of the vineyard. So really, as Wes said, farming down to that very micro level. And then our picking decisions in the vineyard are made off of what the vines are doing, which translates back to the cover crop. So it's very much a circle of how it's related. So a lot of time is spent looking at cover crops, what they're going to do, how we're going to establish them. And in some cases, after in the hillsides, when we plant a cover crop, we then actually come in and lay down straw on top of it, which gives it a much better chance of survival as it grows. So really spending a lot of time trying to figure out what the cover crops can do to help improve the wine qualities and maintain our soils.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know we've been talking, of course, with the 2020 or 2021 vintage that we're in. Sort of hard to believe that we've changed the calendar year. I guess maybe haven't quite gotten used to it yet. So 2021 growing season, that is actually, certainly part and parcel to the weather we've been having, seems likely to start kicking off here sooner than later. And as I mentioned, we haven't received near the rainfall that we've wanted. And, it's one of these things where, last year was an El Nino year and this year was a La Nina year and we're supposed to get rain. So we haven't quite given up hope yet. Although, just last week, Pete and I and his team got together in the vineyard, and we're starting to have the conversations, because that is also, at the end of the day, it's farming, and what we're doing is there isn't a recipe every year for what is supposed to happen and what makes a great wine. It's about what is the season that has given you, and this year we're starting to have the conversation to plan for another dry, exceptionally dry year. And one of the things about that cover crop is, with that competition of water resources, is potentially mowing it down and tilling it sooner than later, so that we can save whatever water resources we have. Although keeping fingers crossed, because I do see that there is some weather on the forecast for next week. It is California. The weather forecasters often get it wrong. So what could be a half an inch of rain could turn into a few inches. It could also pass us by. So we'll wait to see. But regardless, nonetheless, I think one of the things that I've really enjoyed over the years is trusting in your team. And Pete and his crew are such an important part of our team. Before we get into the 18 here, actually, it just popped up in my brain a story that was, I think, was incredible. And I go back to the 2011 vintage. So you look at not only the great vintages in the Napa Valley, in 2018, which we'll talk about here in a minute, is an exceptional vintage. But you go to the challenging vintages, and it's because of teams like Silverado and Pete's crew that gave us a chance in 2011. So 2011 was, of course, the year that we got absolutely doused with rain in the middle of harvest, and what was supposed to be the most inopportune time. And there wasn't anything we can do about it. Normally in harvest, when you're getting close to making that decision to pick the fruit, you can sometimes be right on that edge, and you can say, all right, I see that weather's coming. We've gotten as much as we think we can. Let's pull the trigger and let's go for it. We know that we have the quality of fruit. Even if we maybe want to hang it for a few more days, we know we have the quality of fruit that's going to allow us to make a beautiful wine. 2011, that wasn't even close. The fruit needed weeks. So we had to hope and hope maybe that the forecasters were incorrect in their estimate of what was coming. And in a period of about 36 hours, I think we got 10 to 12 inches of rain up here, up at the estate. It was intense. But one might look at that and be like, well, there went your vintage. Your vintage went got washed away. And one of the great benefits of being where we are, and I think a lot of mountain wines succeeded because of this in 2011, was one, being above the fog line. So immediately after the rains, we had the sun, we had the wind. It never stopped blowing up here. So we had that. So we knew that we were going to be able to get things dried out, but we know we also needed to sort of step in a little bit further. It wasn't such that we were worried about the water on the exterior of the clusters. It was about the sort of the densely packed clusters that we have up here on the mountain at times, and the moisture in there. So I remember calling up Pete, and we chatted for a little while, and we came up with this idea of, all right, we're going to have 20 people here tomorrow morning. And the first 16 people are going to go out in the vineyard, and they're going to pull the leaves from the fruit zone and absolutely strip it, let the airflow in. And then we're going to have 4 people go through with leaf blowers. And we had leaf blowers, and we literally blew off close to the clusters. We blew the water out, and we did our best to absolutely dry that fruit out. And as I said, then the sun came back, the wind came back, and allowed us our chance to hang that fruit without the risk of mold, and ultimately harvested our fruit. We harvested in the first week of November, which is the latest we've ever done, and made, to this day, what I think is one of my favorite wines, the 2011. That, of course, was for Vineyard 7-8, because Correlation Wine Company didn't yet exist in 2011. So back to 2018. Pete, do you remember some things what makes 2018 such a spectacular vintage?
I always say I only remember bad vintages. And so I don't remember much about 2018 other than compared to 17, it was a walk in the park. I mean, I always, people say, oh, it's a fantastic vintage. What did you do? I said, well, there's not much, this is, again, as Wes said earlier, we're growing an agriculture crop. So it's dependent upon Mother Nature. In 2018, everything came together to really give us an amazing vintage. Lots of early spring rains, so the soil profiles were full. Vines were very happy. We had an abundance of crop, which was actually a concern because we're trying to manage growth and manage crop load to be reflective of the wines we're trying to do. So, it's pretty common in wines like Correlation to drop 40% of the fruit on the ground before we pick it because it's not going to be up to the standards we have or after. So in 2018, because of the abundance of fruit, we probably ended up dropping 50% of the fruit on the ground that doesn't get picked. And that's typically done in roughly June. And then as the fruit starts to color right before harvest, we go through at about 80% color and drop the rest of it on the ground that's not coloring properly. And I can distinctly remember standing in the vineyard and seeing just a carpet of fruit on the ground. You have to have real faith that you're doing the right thing at that point, because if you were a lesser brand or a lesser estate, you would want to capture that fruit for something else. But it's really important to get the finished wine qualities. I tell people, the yields in Napa Valley for Cabernet have not changed in 40 years. They're 3.25 tons per acre. And that comes from, 40 years ago, we were farming rows that were 12 feet apart. Now we farm rows that are 6 feet apart. So any economist looking at us would say that this makes no sense to anybody why your yields haven't gone up. And it's really the commitment of the valley to manage the quality of the wines. And that speaks to what we're tasting right here of like, okay, we're going to drop this fruit on the ground. We could have made more cases, but it's so important for the quality of what we're doing to make sure that we manage the expectations of the vintage and the quality we're getting out of it.
Yeah, I usually like to be out of town during that week because, as Pete says, going out and seeing a carpet of purple on the ground is still, as many years as I've been doing this, it's not a sight that you enjoy seeing, but you also truly understand why you do it. Pete was exactly right. 18 started with, especially up here on the mountain, we had abundant rainfall at the absolute appropriate, the best possible times. Allowed the soils to have enough hydration to allow the vines to grow without stress. And as vineyard crews and winemakers, we're working on mitigating that stress, and as much as Mother Nature can help us in that effort, so that we can then try to control some of the decisions rather than have all the decisions made for us. It definitely makes our job easier. And summer, we didn't have a lot of these super hot heat spikes. It wasn't, come into the fall. Really beautiful weather in the fall allowed for us, especially with mountain fruit. We're looking for that hang time. We want that fruit to be able to stay on the vine, not only for concentration, but also for tannin development. For all of our wines, I think it's really important that we do what we can. And water is so important in that tannin development, as is weather, to allow that fruit to hang on the vine. If we're forced into a period of stress, that might force rapid ripening of the fruit. That might force our hand. It might say, okay, well, we're seeing dehydration. It's time to go out and get that fruit and bring it in. So 18 definitely allowed us that chance to just let the fruit do what it's supposed to do and go pick it when it was time. It was, and I'll attest to Pete, after 2017, it was nice to have a little bit of a break. So maybe that means with the 2021 vintage, after 2020, this year will be a breeze. We can one thing.
Nice.
So, speaking of the wine, obviously, I see it's fun to looking through the comments. Looks like Catherine's drinking some 2016 Correlation. Your last bottle of it. It's a good thing that you know somebody. I know a guy that might help if you need to replace some of that. Lou drinking the 2015 there in New Jersey. My friend Oscar drinking some Carneros Pinot. Oscar, you're not allowed to drink Pinot on this show. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. And absolutely. I think, Oscar made a comment here, which was a lot of the 2011s in the Valley are drinking really well. And I think that's the fun part that I completely agree. In the beginning, from a wine criticism standpoint, a lot of the wine critics looked and sort of wrote off the vintage from the very beginning and said, because of those weather challenges that we had, that this was going to be a vintage that people, poured wine down the drain. And it's fun to see, especially, this year, the 2021, here we're going into 10 years later. It'll be fun to see some of the write-ups, because a lot of these critics now are doing these 10-year retrospectives. So I think you're going to start to see some of the critics retasting the 2011s. And I think you're going to see a dramatic shift in thought about these wines and just how good they are.
Yeah, no, Wes, I totally agree with you. I think me, wrote off the 11 vintage, and it has come back to be a very good vintage. And it's similar to the 97, 98 vintage, which 97 was considered an epic vintage, came in early, and those wines are beautiful. And 98 was a very late vintage. We had to wait to pick, and it rained. And so it was written off early on. And if you taste those two vintages back to back now, I think the vast majority of people would prefer 98. So
Yep.
There's a certain amount of, we forget that wines can evolve and turn and become better. So that's the real, what we're seeing in the 11s right now.
Well, I think that brings up a good question, or a good answer here. Catherine asked, where'd it go? I'm holding on to my 2011 because it's one of my favorites. Should I continue to hold it or drink it now? No question, it's going to be showing absolutely beautiful right now. But I think also, as Pete sort of was just saying, the relationship of 97 to 98, 2010 to 2011, the 11s, one of the things that made the 11s so beautiful, one, we did get that hang time. The tannins were gorgeous, super polished, super fine grained tannins. But as it was a cooler year, you really had this bold, vibrant acidity, this freshness of the wine. And you think of the things that are so important in aging a wine, that acid structure, that tannin structure, both of those are so important in allowing a wine to age. So as good as the 2011 is tasting right now, you're not going to miss the boat of sitting on it for longer either. I mean, I think of all of our recent vintages, 2011 is probably one that will go the furthest, just from that structure. And that's not to say any of these wines, I don't think any of our wines are short-lived wines. But I think that it'll be fun to continue to watch it evolve.
I would echo that, Wes. And I think what might be fun to do is, 2010 was considered another epic vintage, really exceptional. And if you have the chance to taste a 10 and 11 next to each other, I think it would be a great educational experience for folks.
Oh, and it gives us an excuse to open another bottle of wine.
Exactly.
Speaking to the 2018 correlation, so of course I guess it was just last week or the week before that we sent out the offering for the new vintage, and obviously beautiful wine. Really excited about this vintage. Talk a little bit about the makeup here of the blend. So this is 91% Cabernet Sauvignon, 5% Merlot, 2% Petit Verdot, and actually for the first time ever, 2% Cabernet Franc. So in 2014-15, we planted here on the Vineyard 7 and 8 estate, we planted some Cabernet Franc, we planted some Petit Verdot, and also some additional Cabernet Sauvignon. And so in 2018, we got the chance to test the waters and get a little bit, and really excited to be able to add that in. I think even at 2%, it's an awesome extra component. This wine was just bottled at the beginning of, I guess almost a month ago. This wine was bottled, so it's part of the reason we're holding on to it. We'll start shipping it to everyone later this month. I think the third week of March we're going to start shipping it. We want to give it a little bit of time to relax, a little time to settle down a little bit. But I think this is actually one of the first times, other than when I was writing the tasting notes a couple of weeks ago, that I've actually had the chance to taste it since bottling, and really excited to see how this is opening up. Really, one of the things that we look for, and I say this about all of our wines, one, you're going to look for, visually, super dark, very rich color. I think that speaks to the mountain. It certainly speaks to our winemaking style. We want that rich extraction. We want that deep color. Next, to me, if those aromatics aren't jumping out of the glass, then you're probably missing a little bit, and you're missing a bit of that experience. So to us, Martha and I really try to focus our winemaking practices and our techniques, and certainly working with Pete and his team, how do we get to enhance and really let those aromatics explode in the wine, and get that concentration as well. So, the correlation to me, especially the 18, is a really dark fruit expression. You get a lot of that black fruit, that blackberry, that blueberry, that cassis, sort of that licorice, and sort of fun. If you've been on our website, we try to have some fun with the tasting notes that I printed out. We tried to put in culinary correlations. We started adding to our tasting notes a few years ago, and so as it's getting close to dinner time here in California, it's certainly dinner time for those on the East Coast. What we said here would be good pairings for this wine: braised venison short ribs with creamy polenta and charred greens, or maybe a roasted duck breast with cherry reduction and roast cauliflower. So I hope you guys on the call are preparing one of those two dishes. At least thinking about how good the wine would taste with that. So, what other questions? You guys have any questions about as it relates to farming and how we do what we do, and how Pete and his team help us make these beautiful wines that we get to share with you guys?
So Wes, if I can just add a comment,
Yeah.
For us as a company, it's really, really important to be able to sit down and taste the wines after harvest and see what the wines are doing, because we can actually influence characteristics in the wine. I pick on Sauvignon Blanc being one of them, and that greenness that you sometimes get out of Sauvignon Blanc that you can describe in a number of ways that are not appropriate for this call. But just that I would call it that New Zealand characteristic. And, by leafing the vines more, by exposing the fruit to sunlight at the proper time, we can knock that characteristic out of them and really clean up those wines and make them much more interesting from a standpoint of what we're seeing in Sauvignon Blanc. So making a much cleaner Sauvignon Blanc than what we would normally see from other parts of the world.
Good question here, Pete, from Lou. He says, does your team also do the picking? Of course, I know the answer, but I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, so we do. So we typically give you a normal harvest day. Harvest is about 60 days long. There's about 12 days during harvest where you consider every other career option in the world. Because it gets to that intensity level. I have a close friend who's a winemaker whose comment generally during harvest is, I can sell ladies' shoes at Nordstrom's. I can do that, and so that's generally the joke. I say it's 10 days. My business partner says it's 14 days of you question why you got into the business. But that being said, yes, we do all the picking. At 7 and 8. Correlation and 7 and 8. We pick into 30-pound boxes instead of half-ton macro bends. Very common for us to start picking at midnight, so that the winery has fruit on the crush pad when they come in the morning, and they can start processing that fruit when it's cool. So our guys picking start between midnight and 7 a.m. depending on what's happening, and we'll pick for roughly 8 hours, 7 to 8 hours, and picking is typically done by piece rate, so they get paid by the piece or by the ton. And very common for them to make. We like to see folks when they're picking make between $40 and $45 an hour. That's obviously not a typical wage, but we really want to make sure folks are getting paid really well for what they're doing, because we also have very high expectations of what the fruit looks like when it's picked and how it comes in. And so not everybody can pick. I will tell you that right now.
Here, let's see if I pull up a fun picture here I can share. So this is a crew wrapping up. As you see, the crew with those yellow boxes there. Each of those boxes hold, as Pete said, about 30 pounds of fruit. The sun is just coming up in the distance there. We typically, because most of the days when we're picking, we're only going after maybe 3 to 5 tons. So Pete and his crew can get in and get that out pretty quickly. So we'll typically, on an early morning for us, an early start for us will be about 4 o'clock in the morning. The tractors arrive. They've got lights, light towers on these tractors. Each of the crew members have headlamps. I'm out there to sort of, at that point, I'm better just watching. Those guys, I've tried picking. The one time I tried picking, the crew looked back at me as they were 2 rows ahead of me and said, "Wes, hurry up. We need those boxes." So I'm much better sort of at watching and making sure that if we have to flag something in the dark for where a pick should start and where a pick should stop, that we're doing that. Of course, I'm also always have my camera in hand because capturing the shots at night are pretty spectacular here on the mountain. But let's sort of speak a minute for why we pick at night. Why not? Would it be easier when it's daytime and you can see everything? Well, for sure it would be. Granted, of course, the weather would be a little bit hotter, but we do it purposefully. So much a part of that first winemaking process in flavor development and color extraction and juice extraction happens during a process that we call cold soaking. And that cold soak process is done prior to the alcoholic fermentation. So we need that fruit to be below, we want it to be about 40, 45 degrees. It doesn't mean that there aren't times that we have, especially, with the inversion layer, sometimes on Spring Mountain, you can be a little bit warmer up here, but at least getting that fruit in when it's cold, we don't have to spend so much time and energy to try to cool it down to the proper temperature versus, picking when it's 80, 90 degrees out and getting this fruit in while it's hot. By the time we add 15 containers of dry ice to the tank, that fruit's probably already hot. There might be a pocket in the middle of that tank that might have already even started fermenting. So that's where we as winemakers try to get in and really help protect the process and control as much of the process. So that cold soak and getting that fruit cold is really important. But it definitely makes for some sleepless nights because from a winemaking standpoint, I'm here 3, 4 o'clock in the morning with the crew to get the fruit picked. But maybe it's by 7 or 8 o'clock we have all the fruit ready to start sorting. But from a winemaking standpoint, that's when the day starts. So the sorting that we do, all hand sorting, and Pete and his crew help us with that. We're here again maybe till 8, 9, 10 o'clock that next night. So in the days that you're doing a back-to-back picking, there's only a few hours that you're going to go take a nap and get back at it. So, Pete, how many vineyards do you guys work with roughly?
I hate to admit this, but I will. About 60. I'm sorry. It sounds far less romantic and exclusive when I say that, but it's about 60. Of those 60 vineyards, that's about 30 estate clients that we work with.
Catherine said, "Yeah, I saw the lights in the mountains when they were there in September. It must have been picking teams." Yes, it is. You wake up in the early morning in Napa Valley during harvest, and you sometimes scratch your head and wondering why it's so light outside, and that's because everybody's out there using lights and picking. It's actually pretty cool. I mean, I find it as exhausting as it is, it's also a pretty magical time. Jeff, my friend and fellow photographer here in Napa, had a good question. Can you briefly comment on some of the different pruning methods that you employ, and do you have a preference or?
Well, I would say it's interesting. I was just with a client today, and they're asking something about pruning, and I said I used to have really strong opinions about pruning, and then consultants got involved, and they now tell me what to do. We actually use a variety of different methods. We actually have a group of Italian consultants that come in every year, and we work pretty closely with them on some, I would call it, new ideas in pruning that are kind of old school in their approach, which is all vines don't need to be tidy and kept clean, but we're really concerned about keeping the sap flow moving up between the through the vine. And so we're trying to encourage that. We do a significant amount of cane pruning, and we do spur pruning. We have a few vineyards that are the old head train style that you probably have seen photographs. Those are typically old vine Zinfandel. If I had my druthers, I would spur prune everything, and that's because it spreads the fruit evenly out over the vine and creates less congestion, and I think leads to probably a more uniform vine. I will tell you that pruning is a little bit like fashion from the standpoint of things come in and go out of style. And so 30 years ago, we used to cane prune, then that went away, and now we're doing more cane pruning again. But I do have, certainly have some preferences, but that doesn't mean that's what we do. From our perspective as a company, we're really driven by what the winemaker and his team are after, and so we try to work around those things.
We do a little bit of both up here, mostly spur pruning, a little bit of cane pruning on our front block at the estate, and on the new blocks over on block 6 and 7 that we planted in 14-15. I think we started out those as cane pruning and ultimately shifted those over to spur pruning. And I think in the beginning, one of the reasons we chose cane pruning was because we had some older vines, and older vines do sometimes bring some disease. And cane pruning allows, if there is any disease spread in the vineyard, cane pruning allows you to effectively, it's a good opportunity to rid some new vines and protect them from potential disease going forward. But as we worked really hard in the vineyard and eradicated a lot of the vines that did have some disease, we felt that we were in a good place, that we had a good, clean vineyard in which to move forward and go back to spur pruning. And for the reason, as Pete said, for that evenness, spreading that evenness of fruit, because especially if we're eliminating so many clusters, we really want that evenness spread out across that vine. So, yeah, but anyway, what I would say at this point, of course, if anybody has any questions, any extra questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, I would say everyone go enjoy some dinner. Hopefully, again, everyone's enjoying some venison or some roasted duck. If not, hopefully soon when you get your 2018. And I'd really like to thank Pete for being the first in our correlation series today. So Pete, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And I will say that if you guys have questions that we didn't get to, email Wes. You can forward them to me, and I'm happy to answer them by email. If somebody's a little shy or just forgot to ask something, I'm happy to do it. But it's really a pleasure to see the fruits of your labor in the glass. And I will tell you that my brother farms in the Central Valley of California, and it's a totally different business and way less fun than what we're doing.
Well, I mean, if you can't have fun doing what you're doing, then we certainly shouldn't be doing it. So, everybody,
Wes Oscar had some interesting questions that you missed, I think.
Oh, what did I miss?
Including the stems in fermentation. Why or why not?
Oh, there we go, Oscar. Yes. Do you include the stems in fermentation? Why or why not? So, that becomes a stylistic choice in winemaking. We do not. We work pretty hard to eliminate all stems, and we're looking for that purity of fruit flavor that comes from the skins and from the grapes themselves. From our Chardonnay standpoint for Vineyard 7 and 8, and for the Sauvignon Blanc for correlation, we will whole cluster press the fruit. So we'll pick the fruit, we'll get it into the winery, into the press. We'll press it, but it's only in contact with those skins and those stems for just a few hours. So you're really not picking up a lot of extraction from that. For the Cabernet, for both Vineyard 7 and 8 and correlation, we are eliminating those stems. They do serve a purpose. They go back out into the vineyard and become compost and sort of degrade back in to help feed the soil. But for us, it ultimately, it comes down to just a stylistic choice of what we're looking for and how we make our wines. Let me scroll through here and see what other picking is. Catherine, you're right. Picking can be a fun experience. And then you realize
come spend a day with me, and we'll see if you still believe it.
Perfect, sold. Catherine, we'll see you out here this fall. We'll find a vineyard to go to.
Perfect
Mom,
excuse to get out there.
Mom asked from New Jersey, do you have a long-term team, or the crew, or does the crew change often? I think Pete could probably answer this, but I think one of the great things that I would say to this is that I think most of Pete's team sticks around. And I think that he's built a team, he's built a company that is so loyal to their mission. And Pete is really good to them. I mean, obviously through what he does with the Farm Worker Foundation and how well he treats his team is sort of a testament to how long that they are around. And you know, the wine industry, I mean, there's always something to be done, whether it's not in the vineyard, whether it's in the winery, whether it's in packaging. There's always something that can be done that where a really good committed crew is needed. So,
Quick
Pete,
question.
I'm happy. I'll speak to that a little bit. Yes.
Pete, have you experienced any issues? I mean, we hear a lot about the labor rates, the minimum wage. We hear a lot about the immigration issues. Talk to us a little bit about how that's impacted you and the pickers.
Yeah, so I'm happy to discuss that. You know, I struggled for years with, so, you know, we ramp up, and we're in our ramp up process right now of adding bodies to work. And I finally, you know, after 30 years figured out, like, here's economy 101, right? That I couldn't figure out. If you pay people more, you get the people to come to work. So we made a deliberate decision about 6 years ago to be the highest paying employer for farm workers in the Valley. Very deliberate. Our folks coming in who've never worked for us before, have no experience, start at $19 an hour. And we're probably $1 ahead of everybody else. Now, I will also say it's next to impossible to live in this county on that wage because of housing costs. So how can we make the life of the farm worker easier? How can we make the life of the farm worker better? And so that's the constant conversation. We provide uniforms for every employee because we want to elevate the professionalism of the farm worker in their own community as well as ours. Our full-time folks all have 401ks, medical, and seasonal employees get medical after 90 days. But we have a little bit of a unique situation where our full-time guys are in a profit sharing plan where they get 10% of the net profit out of the company. And so those folks, it's based on a phantom stock price. So those folks who may have worked for us for 20 years get 20 shares. And if you were a laborer, you get another share. But if you worked for us a year, you get 1 share. And if you were a supervisor, you get 6 shares. So we typically are able to pay out roughly about $2,500 a person in profit to the employees. And as I say, that's the fun stuff, right? That's the cool stuff to be able to do to be able to engage your folks in getting wages. Napa is unique in the fact that we can pay more than the vast majority of agriculture. You know, most of agriculture is going to be in California, will be on a $15 minimum wage next year. Our goal is to have at least a $5 spread between us and what minimum wage is, because 1, the product we're providing, and 2, we really want quality people working for us because we need to understand what we're trying to do. So, yeah, it's a challenge, but I say I would go down on my ship with the folks who work for me because they're the hardest workers and the best people I know. And, you know, my partner, who's been my partner for 18 years, came to this country in 1978 when he was 14, crossed the border, was sent home a number of times, and now is a U.S. citizen, has 1 daughter who's gone to nursing school, another daughter who's at Gonzaga right now, and is the American story, right? He is what created this country, and his bilingual, biliterate, you know, you can pick whatever you want, but one of my other younger partners is a fascinating story. His parents, his mom is a pastry chef for quite a well-known restaurant that most of you probably know of. His dad is an equipment operator for another vineyard management company. Neither of them speak English, and all 4 of their kids went to UC in California, and several of them have master's degrees. So whatever was going on in that house, right, we need to bottle it and sell it. So I am I'm going to get emotional, right? I'm talking about the immigrants, and I will stand by them and link arms with them every day of the week, all day long.
Amen. Amen to that. Can't take goosebumps. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I will tell you just a quick side story. I was about 5 years ago, I was out in the field, and it was a Saturday, and I had my daughter with me, who was at the time, she was 14. And we had 30 or 40 guys working them. And I said, you need to remember something. I'm not the one sending you to college. These people are sending you to college. And so my daughter was in high school, and she had an opportunity to go to El Paso and do some work on the border and try to understand immigration and whatnot. And now I am going to get emotional. And I asked her, I said, well, why are you doing this? Why are you going on this trip? She goes, well, you told me that these people are sending me to college, so I need to go see what their life is like. And so it was one of those moments as a parent where it's like, I got through to my child to understand that these folks have a challenging life, and we need to do everything we can to protect them.
That's fantastic. I love that. No, I mean, quick little story on our end. I mean, obviously, as we're all, working through this pandemic and aiming for the light at the other end of the tunnel, the Valley has been incredibly supportive of its farm workers. And just this morning, I had the opportunity to make sure that my two guys, Jose and Pedro, who have been with me for, gosh, they've been with our family for 20 years. Even before we had a brand, they were working on this property. And I had the opportunity to make sure that they got their first vaccine shot this morning. And as a member of my team and my family, to be able to make sure that they had that opportunity this morning, it was an important day in this family here at the winery, to be able to make sure that they were one step closer to being safer for their family and friends. So they are our lifeblood. I couldn't make these wines without them. Pete couldn't grow the grapes without them, and it's so important. I mean, we're all in this whole journey of life together. So you guys are here for us. We appreciate that. So I think those are good stories to hang the hat on for this evening. So let's raise a glass together. Appreciate you guys so very much. We look forward to seeing you again soon. We're putting together a fun little series this year. So and as the world gets even further closer opening, we can't wait to welcome you back out to Napa Valley. And as it's safe to do so, I can't wait to get back on the road and get back out and start doing dinners with you all as well. So we'll see you soon. Have a great rest of your Wednesday evening. Pete, again, thank you so much for being with me today, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you.